everyone, and welcome to Arch Talks Presents, a program brought to you by EPCC's Architecture Society. Today, we will be interviewing Antje Steinmuller, Associate Professor at California College of the Arts. I will be your host, Stephanie Juarez, Treasurer of the Architecture Society. We hope you enjoy the program.
Hi, Stephanie.
Hi. Nice to meet you too.
Great.
To start, do you want to just talk a little bit about yourself briefly so that our viewers can know who you are?
Absolutely. So I'm Antje Steinmuller. I am currently an associate professor at California College of the Arts. I'm also the chair of the Bachelor of Architecture program there. I'm going into my fourth year, my last year. And I also at CCA direct the Urban Works Agency, and that is our urban research lab. And outside of CCA, which takes really most of my time, I am currently still a principal at a small architecture firm in Berkley. And I founded a few years ago a design consultancy that deals with public space in transition. So that's the kind of spectrum of things I do to varying degrees. And I do research and I write and publish mostly about the commons. And specifically, I'm currently working on a book about the commoning domestic space, so co-living, communal living, and all sorts of things like that.
Do you want to tell us a little bit more about your new project that you're doing, the new book that you're working on?
Sure, I'm happy to do that. I started doing research on the San Francisco housing crisis when things got really bad about 5 years ago. And because I also teach housing studios within the architecture program, I really sort of felt that we as architects have something to contribute. And we also have a lot to learn from things that happen, let's say, outside of the control of architecture. So one of the things that my colleague Niraj Bhatia and I started looking at is how many co-living arrangements started happening in the Bay Area, and that we were basically noticing that the number of communal living, intentional community, co-living startups, etc., that's happening right now is the same as it was here in the 60s, during the Summer of Love, when everyone sort of lived community and, questioned the way we live in cities and the way we work as a society. And our book basically looks at a kind of comparison of the two and sort of seeing like what happens today in light of that backdrop of, kind of really being very political about housing or seeing housing really as a political statement. And we probably argue that that is the case again today, where housing has become so crazy expensive. And anyone who ends up not renting in conventional ways is making a statement against sort of how the system works. And so as part of the work, we have documented around, over 30 co-living arrangements, most of them in California, but also some across the globe. And we also work with the San Francisco Planning Department and got a grant from them to help them think about how the city might regulate group housing. They call it group housing, but it's basically co-living.
Thank you for sharing that. So I have a little bit more questions about basically things that would be helpful to architecture students, since that's like something personal to me. So I just wanted to know a little bit more about like your history and your background and how things were when you were a student.
Yeah, great question. So I hope I can make this short enough. I'm originally from Germany. I grew up in southern Germany in the city of Stuttgart, which is sort of has a lot of automotive industry and so on, and has also a number of universities. And when I entered college, college in Germany is a little bit different. Like you have to already sort of really know what you want to do. There's rarely sort of a moment where you can just kind of go and see what you want to major in. So I started out, just thinking that I wanted to either be in photography or, be a designer of some kind. And I entered a school that offered an interior architecture program. Interior architecture in Germany is a little bit closer to architecture than a lot of the interior design programs here. So we had a lot of the same classes as the architects, specifically all the technical ones of structures and building systems and also sort of small scale building construction. So I started that, and the good part about the program was that after 2 years, you would basically go out into practice for 1 year. And the typical way of doing it would be that you go and work for an architecture firm or an interior architecture firm for a year, and then you come back and you have another year to finish your degree and do a thesis. And for me at that time, I was really tired of Stuttgart. I really wanted to see other places. And that is sort of one of the points I definitely want to highlight for anyone who's listening to this. For me, this was really formative. So the opportunity to do the internship not in Stuttgart, but instead I just wanted to go to the US. And I did this in a very uninformed, naive way. I met an architect on an airplane from New York. My portfolio got lost. I never ended up working for him. And then someone at my school said, oh, so-and-so did an internship in San Francisco. You should really go. And that was a great firm. And I really had no idea. I just kind of went. And, I ended up working for Stanley Seidewitz's office, which is a kind of local boutique firm, really didn't quite know what I was getting myself into. And I stayed for 7 months and then spent the rest of that year actually doing another option that we had, which was doing an exchange with another school. So I basically spent 1 semester at another school, and I was lucky in that that school was in Paris, and it ended up being a school of industrial design. So my internship year in that way sort of brought me from interior architecture to architecture, like 1 scale bigger, and then also to product design and exhibition design, which was sort of almost a scale smaller. And so that year gave me a lot of perspective on what I, kind of how different people think, how they teach, how they think about the environment, etc. Then about different cultures, because I was embedded in two different other languages, not speaking either English or French, very well at the time. So also really dealing with the struggles surrounding that, an experience that is very humbling, of just realizing that you're not fully grasping what everyone is saying. So it was such a formative year for me, in terms of seeing what I did in Germany in a completely different light and in broader context. And so my response to it was basically to take another semester off 6 months later. And I ended up coming back to San Francisco and working more in architecture. And ultimately that led me to the decision to start architecture school right after my thesis, my undergraduate thesis. And in Germany at the time, they didn't have master's programs, so I was basically a second degree student. And I also made the fairly conscious decision that I wanted to move to a bigger city. And this is something that I also urge, I think, all architecture students or aspiring architects to do, is to go to different scale environments. Stuttgart is a city that's a little bit smaller than San Francisco, has about 600,000 inhabitants. It's a regional capital, etc. But Berlin is the largest city in Germany, and also had a sort of recent history from the wall coming down after the Cold War. So it was a really interesting environment for architects to be in and to study architecture. And ended up staying there for 3 years. I got another I guess an equivalent to what would today be a Bachelor of Architecture there. And I would say it's almost like the education at the school was less formative than actually being in the city and seeing how architects and designers just kind of acted in the city, like appropriated space, held crazy events, did spontaneous constructions and interventions. And so I, coming from this very small scale of, interior architecture, furniture design, and so on, I ended up really becoming an urbanist, while I was at that school, just being deeply interested in how cities are made and who contributes to that, and also just simply what the role of citizens is, and how an architect often has to sort of manage kind of in between the urban environment and the citizen one, and what sort of cities legislate. So I finished that, bachelor's degree, but also felt still sort of hungry for something else. I'm like eternally in school. And I had in between, I think over summer, a friend had convinced me to do a summer school program at Berkeley, University of California, Berkeley. And I did it more or less unenthusiastically and just for her, but ended up really enjoying the way people talked about architecture, thought about architecture there. And so after that summer school program, I applied into the master's program and was accepted. And then ever since I've been here, I went through what would have been a 3-year, I think I could have finished in 2.5 years, and I ended up taking 4 years because I also got a fellowship that allowed me to travel for a year to do research for my thesis. And so overall, just to sort of close kind of how what my education was, I think the fact that I was fortunate enough to see different cultures, and I know this might be a topic for anyone being in El Paso and perhaps living across the Mexico border and so on, this sort of the experience of the two different cultures, different languages, different histories, I think is so critical for an architect, just to have a broader perspective. And it's really, I think, unique what people from different cultures bring to a joint education, for example, that has classes with people from different cultures. And I'm still sort of deeply appreciative of the opportunities I had. And also, I teach at CCA, and CCA has a fairly diverse student body from with people from all over the world. And I feel to this day that I have so much to learn, and it's so enriching to be confronted with very different kinds of experiences, backgrounds, and cultures.
All right, thank you. That's very helpful, actually, to think about going to different places and getting backgrounds from different locations. So that's a good suggestion. Thank you. So another thing that I sort of wanted to ask about was, so in my experience, a lot of the struggle that comes with being in architecture school is the presenting and the public speaking that goes along with it, and all the trying to communicate our ideas in a way that that comes across clearly to other people, especially with the language barriers, or also just the technicalities of how to speak properly in the proper language, I guess.
It's such a good point for you to bring up, and I think it is, it's definitely a challenge for anyone in architecture school and learning about architecture. But I also think it remains a challenge in the profession, and also becoming a teacher, right? You can't sort of bypass this in any way. And you also have to always be so aware of who your audience is. Right? The way we speak in architecture school is definitely not the way you speak to a client. You might not have the background and know anything about the history or
right.
Kind of the lingo that we all use. So I think, to first of all, perhaps I'd say that so much of it is just practice. Right? We all have to practice this, over and over again. To this day, like when I present at conferences, etc. And for example, I need to know that I'm really just speaking for 15 minutes because that's the time slot I'm given. I practice. I just set the timer. Speak out loud, hope that no one hears me. And hear myself sort of say things and sort of hear where the communication sort of breaks down, or where I end up getting really muddled in my own thinking. So I would just encourage anyone, before a final presentation, at the end of the semester or so, just practice, get a friend and, practice your 5-minute presentation. You could also, now that we're all on Zoom, etc., record yourself on Zoom and watch it. It's totally excruciating. I certainly don't enjoy it, but it's really helpful, right? Because you sort of see yourself, and as you as you do it in practice, you notice where it's not working and where you might have to think more about the words. So the second point I would make is, it comes back to what you were saying, just like finding the right words and how do architects sort of communicate. And I think it's really important within education to talk about that, right? And to be to never be shy about asking instructors to elaborate on why they're using the term, what the term really means, what the history of the term is, how it's been used before. Some of these things are also really important now, that we are all extra aware of Black culture, Indigenous culture, just simply generally other cultures, and to just be hyper aware of like how we're speaking about things and what kind of terms we're using, and being aware of their context. But I would encourage simply anyone who is an architecture student, really your instructors, don't just be intimidated, say, by how smart someone sounds and what big words they throw around, but instead just neutrally ask, like, can you elaborate, like, what does that term really mean? And I think that then helps you as a student to craft a language that you really own, like what the words mean. You're not just throwing out fancy terms. And also, I think, and this is perhaps also really important, you become more confident when you present, because you really own the material. You feel like you know what you're doing, you know what you're saying, and that's perhaps the last component. It's a broader comment in general, to always work with conviction and follow the passion, that drives your projects, just so you don't end up in a position where you're presenting something that doesn't even feel like your work. Right? And it's just sort of something that's driven by the instructor and by whatever the assignment asks you. It's really important, I think, for any architect to be very clear with themselves what they're interested in. Like, is the project, that might have a specific program that doesn't sound particularly interesting, say it's a supermarket or something, but your project might be about light, right? And how light guides the wayfinding in commercial environments, right? And then you look at projects and how architects have used light, and you build knowledge and you build something that is really fun to talk about.
All right, thank you. So I also wanted to ask, since, when you were starting out doing architecture, it wasn't very common for women to be in the field. So did you have any struggles along with that? And did you have people supporting you, or were people like against you reaching out for that?
Oh, also, it's such a great question. So I really started working, I worked part-time in Berlin, which was still in the 90s. And then I really started working in 2002 here in the US. And I was lucky in that two of my professors hired me, and they had a firm together, and one of them was female, so and minority. So I was really very fortunate to be in an environment where my gender was never an issue at all, in a kind of professional environment. And I also don't think that many of my classmates, went into the workplace at the same time, really had that issue. I think more the only place where I sort of heard that was more in, say, much bigger firms that perhaps at the time still had, say, the upper ranks, of the firm being very, very male.
Right.
So I never had to battle that. I sort of rose through the ranks, at the same firm, and I'm still a principal there. But I would say, for any women architects out there, where I, to this day, struggle with gender issues is in construction. And I've done my share of construction administration, working with contractors, subcontractors, also with more male city planners, etc. And I feel the kind of prejudice there, more than any other place, that I frequent or, am in touch with, not in academia or anything. But I still, while I know that there are women-owned contractors, in the Bay Area, I think it's really a minority, and really the majority, I think, is still male-owned, male-dominated. And I would imagine over time that industry has already gotten used to working with women more. There's more and more women in strong positions, in responsible positions in architectural firms. But I still think somehow, I feel in the position of having to prove myself based on kind of how people talk to me. And I have to make sure I know my stuff better even. I can never sort of wing it, because I sense that kind of, oh, you're a woman, you don't know the technical stuff. So I don't quite know if I can really get a recommendation for this. I think more than anything, I would say for women architects, really don't worry about it in architecture firms. I think we're really sort of moving past that. At least I would hope so. I also, of course, speak from a position of an urban, dense environment of people who really care about gender equality and so on. So there might still be plenty of places in the world where that's not the case. But when it comes to talking with people in the construction industry, etc., just really do make sure you feel confident, right? Whatever that it takes to do that, in terms of preparation, in terms of just seeing the situation for what it is, but find a way to gain confidence just so you can be who you are and, don't feel like you have to prove yourself, which none of us really have to. We are who we are. We've learned a lot. And we just need to, in a way, deal with the industry as it's catching. I feel like my environment was very, very supportive of that. My dad is an engineer, and I'm sure he would have much rather had me be an engineer. But so the struggle was less like me becoming an architect because that's male dominated. It's more like he wanted me to be more technical than architecture is. But never did I have sort of the sense that I couldn't do anything professionally because of my gender. And I think that, was very much part of my environment growing up, that women were very much encouraged to go out. So I feel very lucky, and I have friends here in the US who struggled with that a lot more, and I very much sort of feel bad and sympathize. And just my advice here would be find mentors for yourself. They don't have to be within your profession necessarily. They can be just strong women, strong people, in your life who have been able to sort of do what they felt they needed to be doing and talk to them regularly, maintain them. And that's also not a single person. I think all of us have many aspects of our personality and many aspects of our lives that might require different mentors and different guidance. So I think the kind of network of mentors and also networks of classmates are so important because they become lasting relationships with people you can always turn to. And I think that's really very much important. And it's my personal regret in a way that I think before becoming an instructor and going into academia, I didn't have good mentorship. And I still feel like I'm kind of feeling the consequences of that because I had to sort of work through things more slowly and wasn't super smart about it. And that could have easily been helped had I had a good mentor or had I been smart enough to get a mentor.
Oh, no. Okay. Do you have any final thoughts before we close off?
So I think my last words then are simply, if you think about becoming an architect, really do your research and try to figure out what the right environment is for you, in terms of like what kind of school and also what trajectory into an architecture career, whether it's a 5-year B.Arch program or a 4+2 where you plan for your master's degree in order to get licensed. And be sure you sort of understand how each school really thinks about architecture. And doing that to do that, it's really helpful to just look at who's at that school, what are they doing, what do they care about, and then just finding the place where you can really thrive and where the things that are taught to you are things you're also passionate about. And I say this because I think we're all lucky in that architecture has so many different ways of practicing with the knowledge. And we see more and more architects going in related disciplines, going into the tech industry, working on huge global projects or, doing kitchens. There's so many roles and so many niches, and there's something in a way for everyone. But the challenge then is to figure out like where the best place is for each of us, and then to figure out the education that goes with it.
All right. Thank you so much. I think that wraps up the time we have here, but thank you for your time. And it was very good talking to you. I have a lot of new knowledge thanks to you.
Thank you, Stephanie. I was happy to do it.
Thank you.
Good luck with everything going forward.
Thank you, and you as well.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye. This concludes our program. Thank you for listening to Art Talks Presents, brought to you by EPCC's Architecture Society, an interview with Antje Steinmuller. This is your host, Stephanie Juarez. Until next time.